Hello, my friend.
Hi, hi,
I am doing very well. How are you?
today,
Of course. I'm grateful to be here. I am doing very well. It's Friday. It's a wonderful day. It's been a wonderful week, and yeah, all things are going very well.
good, 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 good.
No, I already did research. I checked in on the podcast, so I am familiar with you and what you do. I'm ready to get going wherever you are. So the first time I ever had suicidal ideations, it's usually actually not the part I talk about in my story. So I had achieved a level of quote unquote success financially, but internally I was so miserable and I was so unfulfilled and I was not excited for the future. And I remember I was home alone one day and my partner and I lived in a home with two other people. So I was all by myself and I was off of work for the day. I was at home playing video games. And I remember just having this moment where I thought to myself, if this is all that life is, I don't know if I want to be here anymore. It's so gray and it's so dark and it seems so hopeless. So that was the first time I had ever had any thought about not being here might actually be better than being here for me. And I ended up going to therapy. But when it really hit me, when it really, really, really hit me, I had, and you're going to see there's a trend here, I had the most financially successful year of my life. I was super unfulfilled. I thought it was going to internally fix all the things that I felt were wrong with me. So I realized maybe that job and what I was doing was not going to be the journey I wanted to take. I started a podcast in 2017, fell in love with the podcast as I fell out of love with my job. But unfortunately, the podcast was not making any money. So I had to keep doing this job. And I felt like the podcast was taking me away from something that I loved. So that ended up leading to me having another moment where I was sitting on the edge of a bed. I was in a hotel traveling for work. And I remember I woke up and it felt like there was 10 televisions on in my head at the same time. And every single one was on a different station. And one was saying, you're stuck at this job forever. You're never going to be successful as a podcaster. What if you do leave? What are your friends going to think? What are your family going to think? And it was in that moment where I had another one of those thoughts where I said, if I'm not here, if I go away, I'll take all these problems with me. So those were really the two big ones that I had dealt with in my past. And after that, I ended up leaving my job and going full time into what we're doing today. I worked in an industry called weatherization. And all that means is we would go into large buildings, usually schools, police stations, fire departments. Usually it was stuff that was state owned. And it was our job to make those buildings more energy efficient. When I first took the job, I was convinced this was going to be the job that I do forever because I was actually making a lot of money. And as someone who never anticipated being at all remotely successful, especially financially so, I thought this was going to be my big break. The reason I was unfulfilled is because I just think I had the wrong approach. I had the assumption that if I can create external success and I can have a nice body and I can have a beautiful partner and I can have money in the bank and a nice car and all these things, status, I had the assumption that that was going to make me feel really good about myself internally. So I think the simplest answer was I did a lot of work in the external world. I never really worked on myself internally. And when I got to a certain level of external success, it was too far off. My external success was so much further along than my internal success, self-awareness, and fulfillment that I just couldn't exist that way. So yeah, it was really the understanding that I'd worked so hard to look successful, but I never really understood what that meant to me. And I didn't really understand myself at a deep level. And self-awareness was the cure for that at the very beginning for me.
No. Oh. Yeah.
I think in my mind, I would be okay. I don't know. I don't think I ever really understood how important it was to know yourself. So I thought that if I just kept acquiring success, eventually I would hit the right button and the right button would bring me happiness. So I thought that I liked looking successful more than actually feeling successful. And I thought that if I just looked very successful, everybody would treat me like that. And then eventually my internal self, my confidence, my self-worth, my self-belief, the ability to set boundaries, all that stuff, I think I assumed that that would catch up with my external results, when now more than ever, I think it's actually the opposite. I think if you start internal, you can work on the internal self, and then if and when the external results come, they'll actually stay. So I think I like the fact, or I thought I liked the fact, that if I just got successful, everything would just kind of work itself out. And I did not find that was the case for me. Yeah, I was 6 hours away from home. I was in a dirty, dark hotel room getting ready to go do another week of work. And I just remember waking up that morning and I just felt so empty and I felt so stuck. And I just felt like I was at the rock bottom of my life. And I just couldn't imagine continuing to go the way I was going. It just felt like there was no light at the end of the tunnel. It felt like I was too far in to start over. I had a reputation of being successful, and I was afraid to start over and look like a failure. And I was afraid what my friends would think, and I was afraid what my family would think. And I transparently didn't think this podcast thing was realistic at all. I didn't think I'd be successful. So I had the belief that if I wasn't here, I wouldn't have to worry about that. I wouldn't have to worry about finding a new job. I wouldn't have to worry about my mental health. I wouldn't have to worry about any of that. And it just seemed like at the time that would be the easier route. I'm very blessed that I have positive people in my life, because I reached out to one of my friends who's now the co-host of our podcast and my business partner. And I explained to him what was going on. I said, Alan, I'm struggling with my mental health. I don't know what's going on. I don't feel good. I don't know if I want to be here anymore. What do I do? And he said many, many things. Alan is very long-winded. He said many things. But the thing that I remember most was, Kev, over the last few years, your awareness has changed a ton, but your environments have remained the same, right? I've been working on self-awareness. I want to understand myself at a deeper level, but I'm still doing the same stuff. I'm still hanging out with the same people. My environments were very similar to the way they used to be. And he said, if you want to change, you should probably change your environment. So that's when I ended up leaving the job, because I just think at that time I had enough certainty. Looking back now, it's one of the best things that happened to me. At the time, it was obviously the worst, but I think of it from a perspective of sometimes we have to go to a very dark place to be willing to search for the light again. And that's where I was. I was at the end of my rope, so to speak. So there really was nowhere else to go. And I'm glad I made the choice I did. And really the goal with all that is now to be the person that I needed when I wanted to die, when I didn't want to be here anymore. That's why I try to show up as the most positive version of myself now. Definitely, yeah. I had a very weird moment, probably a year and a half, 2 years after I left my job, where I was walking around the kitchen. I'd moved in with one of my best friends. We were chasing our dreams together. He was an entrepreneur as well. And I was the brokest I'd ever been. I was so single. I had no prospects of love. Nobody was listening to the podcast. But I remember it was the first time that I really felt proud of myself. I was proud of what I was doing. I was proud of the impact that I was trying to have on the world. I was just proud of the man I was becoming, my character. That was a very important time for me because it made me understand that if I do the inner work, I will be more balanced. When I do get the external success eventually, I'll actually be able to handle it. So, yeah, now I'm someone who I care I care more about being a good person and a good man and a good husband and a good business partner and a good leader than I care about the level of success I achieve for sure. And now I really work hard to make sure that I am working diligently internally. So whatever results we create with the business and with the podcast, I'm able to sustain them from a character, mental health, emotional health, spiritual health place. It's been a very it's been a very challenging pivot to go from trying to be the most externally successful possible to going purely internal for several years, being very, very, very broke, and now getting to where we are today. So the version of me today is the most successful I've been holistically. I have a wonderful relationship with my wife. I have a great relationship with my body. Our business is doing really well. My mental health is in a great place. So I feel like I know myself at the deepest level I ever have, which means I'm also able to understand the way I'm feeling and why I'm feeling that way. So, all things considered, I would say the most holistically successful I've ever been.
Really good. No. And one. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, from what I have found, and at least from my experience and talking to many others, the reason we feel like we're at rock bottom today usually isn't because of something that happened today. It's usually something that happened in the past. So I have a couple thoughts. One, reach out to someone that you feel safe talking to because a lot of people are struggling and a lot of people have struggled and a lot of people will struggle. But it's important to find someone that you feel like you can be vulnerable with. That's why I always, when I tell my story, I try to talk about how lucky I felt that I had somebody I felt safe being vulnerable with. So I think that's number one. I think number two is using it as an opportunity to learn more about yourself. I think that's always going to be beneficial. And then three, I think it's a really good way for you to understand that whatever you're doing probably isn't sustainable. So it might be a good time to sit down and say, okay, based on what I used to value, what is different about me today when it comes to maybe my core beliefs, maybe when it comes to my core values, maybe when it comes to my overall goals? Why did I work so hard and end up where I am today? What could I actually pivot from a goal perspective, from a future perspective that would help me today? But this is one of the things I always say. And I know it's kind of a cliche thing, but most of us, or whoever invented the first umbrella, probably didn't invent the umbrella during a rainstorm. They probably invented it before they walked out in the rain because they were sick of getting wet. I think of vulnerability and sharing very similarly. When it's hard to share when you're struggling, but if you can practice being vulnerable before you actually need to, before your back is against the wall, and that's really the only option you have, I think you'll be better off. So if you're listening and you're not even close to rock bottom and you feel like you're crushing it, now is the time to talk with people close to you and be vulnerable in case, unfortunately, a day like that does come where you need to reach out to someone that you feel safe around. So those are usually the pieces of advice I would give. But like I said earlier, when I was struggling, I went and I seeked out therapy. and I had a therapist and I had a counselor. That's something that was really, really beneficial for me because it helped me understand myself at a deeper level. And I didn't have to think to myself, oh, I'm broken, or there's something wrong with me, or I am insert some sort of label here. That was very, very helpful for me. And I assume it would probably be helpful for others as well. I definitely think it can be. Yeah, if you think of the way that maybe a boy is raised versus maybe a girl, I know that I wasn't journaling at a young age, talking about my feelings or writing down my emotions. I didn't even know how to label my emotions, really. I would say that's accurate. And I think because many men are raised with rub dirt on it, we don't talk about our feelings, crying is weak, sharing, oversharing is not good, hold it in, be the rock, that type of stuff. I was raised by two women. I was raised by my mom and my grandmother. So I didn't have somebody who was super masculine around telling me to hide my feelings, which I think has helped me tremendously. I think it helps me to be vulnerable. But yeah, I would say it can definitely be challenging as a man because you're afraid of what other people think and you want to look strong. And we have at times a misbelief that talking about mental health is weak, when in reality, it's challenging to do. And that's one of the reasons a lot of us don't do it, is because it's challenging. So it would actually be a strength to do it. It's not a weakness to share how you're feeling. It's a strength to share how you're feeling. And that's one of the reasons it's so hard. So I think just redefining that narrative and saying, look, sharing the way you're feeling does not make you weak. It's going to be really good for your relationships. 100%. My wife and I have a great relationship because we share how we're really feeling. And I know she trusts me more because of that. And I know we're closer and more connected because of that. And I have a very good relationship with my friends where I can say, hey, I'm struggling, or I'm a little bit anxious today, or whatever it may be. But that's because we are brave enough to have those conversations. So yeah, I can definitely understand why as a man, oftentimes it's harder, but I do think the people around you can make it a little bit easier. Somebody has to lead the dance though. One of the best things I ever did, this was years ago, but I remember I used to, when I was spending time with my friends and I was getting ready to leave or we were texting, I would just say, hey, I love you. I love you and I appreciate you and I'm grateful for you. And that was my way of just opening the door of vulnerability. And that's something now I say to all of my friends. I say that to our team and everything. So yeah, I can definitely understand why it could be harder as a man. I think one of the reasons is a lot of the other people around you, potentially men, don't really know how to be vulnerable yet. So it kind of becomes this fence to sharing. But I think through practice and the understanding that it's worth it, it's definitely something we can get to. Oh my goodness. The very beginning, I remember my partner at the time said, hey, I think you should go to therapy. And I, just like we talked about, I said, I don't think so. I don't really think I need it. I feel like I'll just work through it. I think I'll be okay. And eventually I listened and I was convinced. So I said, okay, I think this is something I should do. And at the time I lived in Boston, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston. So I found a therapist in Boston. And if anybody listening or watching has been to Boston, you know the traffic is a nightmare. And finding a place to park in downtown Boston is a whole thing. So I was so scared that day. I remember trying to find a parking spot, and I remember walking up the stairs in this building, these old creaky stairs to the top of the building, and walking into the office. And I remember thinking, number one, am I going to cry? Number two, going to what we just talked about, is it going to look weak if I share my feelings? I remember I had those exact thoughts, and I definitely cried 100%. But I remember I didn't want to do it before I went. And I remember when I left that day, I felt like there was a weight lifted off my shoulders, number one. I was super grateful I did. I felt so much progress even in like the first hour. So I knew it was beneficial. And I had a new understanding of myself. I had a deeper level of self awareness, which really, really helped me. I ended up going to that therapist for a while, and then I ended up moving, and then I got a new therapist. And then honestly, when I left my job, my depression pretty much went away, which was weird. And that maybe that speaks to the power or struggle of having a misaligned job. But yeah, my therapy experience was very nerve-wracking in the beginning. But one of the reasons I try to talk about it so openly is because I had a really good experience. And I don't know if I didn't have somebody pushing me, if I would have had the courage to go. So I always try to share it from an empowering place where, look, if you find someone you resonate with and you find someone who you trust and you feel comfortable talking to, I think it is hugely beneficial.
But no, the uh, more momentum. Yeah,
Yeah, it was definitely nerve wracking because I didn't know how people were going to respond. I didn't know what my friends would think. I didn't know what the people I worked with would think. And I think in the beginning, I was not very forthcoming. I talk about it very openly now and very vulnerably now because it's been a long time. But in the beginning, I was nervous about what people would think. What would my mom and grandmother think if they knew I was going to therapy? Would they be worried? For a long time, I did. I thought it meant something about me. I thought it would paint me in a certain light. So I definitely had fear around the judgment. I had fear around maybe what that would do to my identity. But like I said, it was the first time I went, I changed my tune. If I had any reservations or any doubts before, the second I was walking out after my first appointment, I had been definitely changed. My opinion was changed on therapy. Just because I think at the end of the day, oftentimes it's taboo to talk about our feelings and the deep stuff, like the deep, dark stuff, the fears, the insecurities, the limiting beliefs, the traumas, triggers, that type of stuff. It was very freeing and very empowering to know that there was a place where I could actually talk about the stuff that really, really mattered. And that, I think that's one of the reasons I love podcasting, because I can talk about stuff that really matters as well. So there's definitely taboo around it. I'm hopeful and grateful that I feel like the taboo is starting to change. It's a lot more mainstream now to talk about feelings and emotions and traumas, and therapy and counseling is a lot more common. So I do think we're going in the right direction when it comes to the taboo.
okay.
I would say self-awareness is one of the most valuable things in the world. I really do believe that at a deep level, because the more we understand ourselves, the more everything else kind of starts to make sense. And at the end of the day, we are the vessel with which we are going to live our entire existence. And a lot of us know a lot about our cell phones, or we know a lot about what's going on TV, or maybe we know a lot about a restaurant or a musician. If we knew as much about ourselves as we did all the other stuff, I would say we'd probably be more quote unquote successful, whatever that means to you. And then, yeah, just a tangent off of that, understanding and identifying what success means to you is such an important facet of life, because nobody else really gets to decide what success means to you. And if you end up chasing somebody else's version of success, even if you end up getting it, you might feel a similar way to how I felt. You might not feel fulfilled. You might not feel aligned. You might not feel like you're growing and contributing. So as a part of self-awareness, try to figure out what success actually means to you and what you truly want out of life, regardless of other people. Much easier said than done, I realize, but many of the hard things are. Thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you for having me, and keep doing the amazing work you're doing.